Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Woman Today. We hope that you're really well. It's a very cold evening today, so I hope you're all with your cups of tea and you're warm and you're relaxed. So today we're talking about a very interesting topic. We're talking about the intergenerational storytelling. So I'm going to ask you a few questions at home. So first of all, when was the last time that you heard a story from your grandparents in your childhood, if you can remember a story? When was the last time your child sat down with their grandparents and they heard a story from them? Or if you're a grandparent yourself, when was the last time you told a story to your grandchildren? So these are some of the things we're going to be talking about with our special guest in the studio, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. But we would love to hear from you on this important topic. The number is on the screen at the bottom, so please do call anytime during the show. We'd love to hear your experiences of anything that might come up that might actually trigger a memory for you or something that's happening right now in your life. So welcome to the show. So first of all, I just want to introduce my guests. So Dr. Mahela Ruby.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Welcome to the show. We had you 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
We're so happy to have you back again.
Alhamdulillah, pleasure to be here.
Just to introduce Dr. Ruby. Dr. Ruby is an author. She's a personal development and parenting coach, and she's also involved in many community organisation projects. So very busy person, so we're very privileged to have you in the studio with us today.
Thank you.
And we have another special guest with us. We have Brother NURULL Islam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for coming through the cold in this evening, so we're really happy to have you here. And just to introduce Brother NURULL, he's one of the co-founders of the Myland Community Project. He's a community organiser, a creative and a filmmaker. He's also designed and led on multiple award-winning projects which relates to the community. He's an honorary fellow at the Queen Mary University of London, and he's also an associate artist with PACAMA. And there's so much more that he's done in his background, and we're going to talk about that a bit more in terms of one of the projects we're talking about today. So to both of you, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
So today we're talking about intergenerational storytelling. So what this is, it's about how stories are told between different generations, so between the grandparents and the grandchildren, which is what we're going to focus on today. And we're looking at a particular project which both of you have been involved with, which is called Story from Homes. And I only came across this recently, and I'm absolutely fascinated by it. So if I can start with you, Brother NURULL, if you can tell us a bit more about what this Stories from Homes project is and what it's about.
So Stories from Home started in 2018. It's a collaboration between Myland Community Project, Queen Mary University of London, the Linguistics Department, Blooming Parenting with Sister MAHERA, and Human Stories, our colleague Lindsay Knight. And the projects from our perspective, from Myland Community Projects, are as a individual, my observations and kind of and my own experiences at home, I just kind of noticing more and more that, you know what, the mother tongue is not kind of being used in the home environment, in the community. When you look at the younger generation, I work very closely with young people, and we do a number of creative projects, especially using film and media, and we wanted to kind of use this to help kind of explore what was actually going on. And for me, it was quite daunting to kind of think that our younger generation, including my kids, they're becoming more and more detached from their heritage, and especially although we started in 2018, but over the last kind of 18 months or so, seeing so many of our kind of elders sadly leaving us, and with them, you know, we are losing so much, and they have so much to kind of share, so much to kind of, so much knowledge that they can kind of pass on. And so with that in mind, and my work with Queen Mary University, we met Kathleen, and she described obviously the work that she was doing with schools and heritage language.
Is Kathleen part of the project as
well?
That's
right, yeah.
Okay.
From the Linguistics Department.
Ah, okay.
And then obviously Sister MAHERA, that she's been doing the work around obviously parents and grandparents, and our colleague Lindsay, who's by profession a filmmaker. So just through that conversation, our own interests, we decided to kind of embark on this, the Stories from Home kind of journey. And it's just everybody's individual kind of interest on this topic. So mine obviously from a grassroots community perspective, we've got a research angle, obviously we've got the film aspects of it, and obviously Sister MAHERA with her engagement on parenting and grandparents as well. So And since then, it really has been a continuous kind of journey, and there's so much more to come, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a bit more. But I don't know if you want to add a bit more to...
Yeah, no, I think it was really interesting because we all had our individual take on this idea. So myself, how I met Kathleen McCarthy, this is Dr. Kathleen McCarthy, was through another colleague at Queen Mary, who we happened to be at the same conference. And there was something that always bothered me, being in academia, that we research within the community, but actually we don't get to interact with the community to really develop those findings from the research. So I then met up with Kathleen and Devyani, and then we spoke about how we can do that, because Queen Mary sits, interestingly, on one side of Mylan Road, but on the other side you have the communities that we often research. So we really, and then NURULL and I probably lived on the same street, but we actually never met with these common interests. It was through Queen Mary, actually, we all met and we all had a common interest. And there was some funding available through Queen Mary's public engagement funding, and we grabbed that. So we had small projects like building,
Languages in Our Lives.
Languages in Our Lives, and we had Bridging the Gap. So we had little projects which then led on to really the Stories from Home. And there was a lot of interest from the community as well, because like we were discussing in our last programme, really highlighting the role of elders in our community and the role that they can play in shaping children's identities, the whole child that we were talking about last time. So so that's how kind of the Stories from Home built. And we brilliant team, so with Lindsay on board as well, the short films, we were able to make those short films.
We're going to see some of the clips a bit later on, and it's amazing. Like, it's just what you've been able to achieve with these clips. The storytelling that and we spoke about it in the last show, and we're going to talk about today, but why is it important in this format? Why is this kind of storytelling important for us to kind of talk about and discuss and to hold on to?
I mean, from my perspective, from the research that we have been doing, and I've been involved in intergenerational sort of research from about 2004, one of the trends we've noticed is that particularly grandparents, they feel it's sort of unsaid. A lot of things are unsaid. So they feel that the grandchildren don't understand Bangla, third, fourth generation children. The third, fourth generation children, they're so busy, and we being parents as gatekeepers, like I mentioned last time, there isn't that opportunity or enough time to build on something. So it sort of visits, everybody's busy, lots of family come together, but there isn't that focus on that relationship building. So for various reasons, those connections were starting to fade. And grandparents would, even the childcare was changing. So in our time, maybe grandparents were taking care of the children when parents were going to work or in education. That was also shifting because children were going to more daycare or nurseries. So
away from the grandparents.
So there was a real disconnect actually between the third, fourth generation children, particularly in the Bangladeshi community, because we've been here quite a long time. So we have the third coming onto the fourth generation.
Was there a lot of fourth generation at that time when you did the project? Was there
quite a few? But these are more third generation children we interacted with, the three generation families. So my granddaughter, as an example, is fourth generation. And so, I find it really interesting how she communicates with my dad, who's her great granddad, because he has more of the language, the how he communicates. But really, those the real importance, as you were asking, is because through that connection, they get to understand and hear and value through the stories 2 generations before that. So that if the grandparent is sharing stories with the grandchild, they bring in experiences from their own grandparents, possibly. So what this grandchild has then is 4 generations of stories, in a sense, 3 or 4 generations.
So much richness.
So much richness in their rooting or grounding or heritage. And personally, from the interactions I've had with young people, those who have had close connections with their grandparents,
Yeah.
they seem to come across more grounded in their identity, who they are,
Yeah.
and don't necessarily, I mean, we all have identity crisis at some point,
Yeah.
but how they go through it is slightly different to those who haven't had
Yeah.
that connection.
Yeah.
So the importance is really continuation of
Yeah.
heritage.
Brother Nur, you spoke about how you felt that this was something that was needed in the community because you grew up here, as I did, and as Dr. Ruby did. Why? I mean, do you feel that the stories are disappearing from the community? Do you feel like this whole act of storytelling between the generations, do you think it's something that's dwindling
Definitely.
at the moment?
So my work in the community, and sadly losing some dear uncles of mine, and we had kind of intentions of doing some creative projects with them, documenting and preserving some of their oral histories. And sadly, it just didn't get around to doing it because sadly they passed away. So it was these kind of things, and actually prior to this project, we've done this another film that we produced called Migrate Journeys, around migration journeys, and the things they have to share, the sacrifices, the difficult sacrifices they made coming to this country,
which we don't know about.
Which we don't know about.
Yeah.
And so I've always had an interest, and I've always included the older members of our community in our creative projects, whether it be just the photography projects or the film ones. And to be honest, if you give them a listening ear, they'll really open up.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to kind of make an appointment because you know it's going to be a very long session. So with all of these things in mind and doing the creative projects that we have been doing, and then obviously when I got to meet, and I think it's almost like a perfect team that we have, the interest and the unique kind of skills that we bring to the project. So with all of that in mind, it just felt a great project to start, and one, to preserve some of these important journeys, stories, and even just fun ones, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I grew up listening to, we call it Kitcha. We grew up listening to those, but those, I mean, how often, you can ask your viewers today, how often do they hear that?
Yeah.
And I think when people come across this project, they remember their own childhood, and it kind of takes them back, and it does kind of dawn on them that, you know what, it may be, in my observation, that it may be a lost language within that particular generation.
Yeah.
Now, from a research perspective, it's completely different,
Yeah.
and this is where you've got universities like obviously Queen Mary, University of London, and also SOAS. They're doing mother tongue. I think it's the Sileti project that they're doing. So there are these, and obviously we've got social media, you've got YouTube, people kind of doing different programs. But for me, it was mainly around capturing, documenting, and preserving some of these amazing journeys and stories that they have to offer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, when I was speaking to the grandmothers, through my research, many of them were saying that would they be interested? Would they have the time? They're so busy.
That was my next question. Like, what was the response like?
Yeah, so they weren't really sure the value of the stories they had to tell to the generation that seems so busy with modernity, with such much more exciting things to do, games they play. It seemed sort of trivial, or not, I don't think that's the right word, but sort of mundane. Would I sit there and tell them a story? Would they be interested? Wouldn't they rather go and play with their friends or be somewhere else? But actually, from our stories that we've captured, this was probably one of the for many of them, this was the first time they shared those stories with their grandchildren, and they were fascinated. They really did enjoy the listening to the stories, but it was also the closeness they felt, the way they sat. There was so much warmth.
I noticed that. I mean, we're going to see it in the clips that we're going to watch, but I've noticed the physical, like hugging and holding, and that was very noticeable for me because it happened through the storytelling. I'm guessing that's how it happened. What was the process like? When you approached these, members of the community for them to do a story with the younger ones, what was it like? I imagine it would have been difficult. I don't know if it was difficult to try and do something that's not been done before, I suppose.
I think through our connections, so when we first started the project, we worked with Thomas Buxton and Stedman Primary School.
So schools
Kathleen.
were involved.
Yes,
We
so we've
worked
got
with
them.
schools.
Yeah,
Okay.
because our colleague Kathleen, she had a connection with those schools. So when
Okay.
she put it out to them, they were very interested, and we had a huge number of attendants on both workshops.
Yeah.
And we asked them to kind of bring an object if they had one to kind of help kind of maybe tap into part of memory that's been kind of lost. And so yeah, we designed a workshop. They came in, they had different objects. We had props.
These are the grandparents.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so
Yeah.
from that, they were kind of looking at some of these images or looking at the objects, or even some
Parents
of the
came as well, didn't they?
parents came.
Yeah.
And then from that, the idea was for them to think about a story or a journey or something that they wanted to share with their grandchild. And so they would tell the story in their heritage language. In some cases, it was translated by the parent and then retold and illustrated by the child. So it was obviously Bengali or Sylheti, and then retold in English and then illustrated as well.
Okay.
And so that was the process for some of our workshops. We captured 3 films during lockdown, so we had to do that via Zoom. So some of the films, I think one of them you'll see, we had to do that via Zoom, and even then it felt more important to do because obviously sadly losing so many people from that.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of process, and since then, to be honest with you, the project's been at numerous film festivals, and everybody who kind of attends the workshops or any of the screenings, I think, especially if they're from that particular community, then you can see them kind of thinking about what they want to do, or it's kind of a help remind them of a time when they were growing up with that particular language. And it's not just to kind of add, we were actually invited to a symposium at a university, and it wasn't just the Bangladeshi community. This was happening in other communities as well.
Yeah.
And so, but they found it quite unique in terms of our approach by using film in terms of discussing this particular subject.
Okay, I'm not going to tease the audience anymore. Let's watch one of these clips first. So we're going to play the first clip, and it's called A Life Full of Prayer. So let's go to the clip now and we'll watch it.
Hisham, tomorrow I screw up the Nutun got on. It is not a story, but it's a true story. আমি যখন ছোট্ট 8-9 বছর আর কি, তখন সকালে আমরা সাধারণত নেশাবার কাছে পড়া যেতাম মাদ্রাসাতে আর কি।
When my dad was very young, he used to go to a madrasa. He learned Arabic and Quran there, and one day he had to go to his lesson, but my dad's dada called him back and said that, look, can you itch his back?
তারপরে 2বার হয়েছিল, আমি কিন্তু শুনছি না, আমি গেছি অর্ধেক যাওয়ার পরে অটোমেটিক্যালি আমি স্টপ হয়েছি, আবার ফিরে আসছি আধা ফত আমি ফিরে আসছি।
My dada was just like, look, I have to go. But about halfway through my dad's journey to his madrasa, he was just like, look, I have to go back because he didn't want to disappoint his dada.
Then quite একেবারে এরপরে তাই আমার আত্মদর্শন আর কি, ওইটা যে ঠিক আছে আর না যাও বেতন। কিন্তু একটা জিনিস আমি চিন্তা করি, যখন তাই আমার ভাই তো অন্যের সিদ্ধান্ত চোখ ঠান্ডা নেই, আমার তো এরপরে আমার মনে হয়েছে যে ডেফিনেটলি তাই আমার লাগে দোয়া করছে।
He went back and he gave his dada that scratch that he really wanted. Then his dada made lots of prayers for him.
যাওয়ার আধা ঘন্টা পরে আর কি সামবডি গিয়া কইছে আমার হিজ পাস্টর। আমি যে অত বড় গিলটি হইলাম, মানে আল্লাহর কাছে শুকরিয়া আর কি যে আমার এতন করছে।
Then my dada went to his madrasa and he got some bad news that his dada passed away. But he was thankful that he went back.
যেটার পরিণাম আমি ফল আমি আইজও ফাইলাম, এটা আমার জীবনে আমি হারতে পারতাম না, কোনোদিনই হারতে পারতাম না। আমি আমার চিন্তাটা হয়েছি, তাই ঘটনাটা হয়েছে আর কি। হিসাম তোমারও আজ হয়ে দাম আর কি, যে জিনিসটা মানে সবচেয়ে বড় ইম্পর্টেন্ট জিনিস হইল।
Now dada believes that those prayers that his dada made for him, like such a long time ago when he was 8 or 9, they're still with him. That when he's in hardships, that he finds that they're easy for him.
That was really powerful. That's probably one of my favourite clips that I watched, because I got to see most of them. So what was that like, you know, when you went to that particular granddad and his grandson? What was it like filming that?
So again, we this was our second batch of films that we've done with residents from Barking and Dagenham. And so we kind of, again, through our outreach, we'll put it out there in terms of these, we're looking for families to be involved in this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so they were very keen. And just to kind of add on your previous point, when we were speaking to first generation, you know, they love this project. You know, I remember sharing this by chance with I was in at a mosque, and there was an elderly man there. I don't know how we got round to it. And I think I offered him a chair, and then through that conversation, he's like, oh, thank you. And I said, oh, we're doing this project. And he was crying.
Because of the project?
He was crying. He goes, you know what, thank you. He goes, yeah, this is such a fantastic project you're doing. You don't hear much of this. And, you know, it's just one of many kind of engagements. So when they heard about this project, they were very keen to get involved. And obviously this is, I think Hisham, I think that's the first time Hisham heard that as well. And for his grandfather to kind of share it in this way and to know that
you can hear it in his voice.
Yes.
You could definitely pick it up in his voice.
It was very emotional. It was very emotional, actually. But what an amazing story. You know, something that is going to be with them, with their family.
And it touches on, you know, what you were talking about, how the third generation is benefiting from not just the first generation, but also their great-grandparents. And that's what happens here.
Yes, the relationship between this granddad and his granddad.
Which is, it's actually two generations.
So, you know, family values, when you think about family values and a continuation of family values, if you, it does something, I guess, when you know it's generations on. You know, when you hear generations ago people were poets in the family, so you have an incentive to think, oh, maybe my writing has some significance, maybe I can grow that. So I think young people can get a lot of motivation as well from, you know, you've seen Hisham's artwork, mashallah,
outstanding.
It's incredible.
It's just, I had to look thinking, did he draw that? It was just amazing. And I think that's what's really powerful, is
so
the fact that
that's the self-esteem,
and its emotions as well. They capture the emotion in the
This project has kind of brought out a new, you could say, a breed of storytellers and narrators and illustrators. And so this is how the project's been kind of evolving. You know, again, you'll see on some of the other films, and I think especially the storytellers in this case, you know, there's so much, and that's what we're trying to do, that we're trying to build up a library of these, hopefully films, but even if it's just being audio, you know, and obviously for the young people, you know, as illustrators to kind of illustrate some of these amazing stories as well. So
it's really emphasising the sense of connection and belonging. So the sense of connection,
where they come from,
but also connection to, the who they are connected through. So seeing that lineage, I guess, is really powerful. For the young people.
The whole process of them drawing the pictures and listening to the stories, were you surprised by anything in that process? I mean, was it easy for them to be able to capture the stories of their grandparents or understand what was being said?
So it gets for those who understand it, and obviously because we're producing short films, they won't be able to obviously illustrate everything, but it's the key points that stood out for them. And obviously the confidence in the illustrator. Obviously in this case, Hisham, he has a background in arts, and obviously again he's just he's that particular film and the level of illustration, that one is just really good. So it kind of really came beautifully together with the story.
But it's interesting because the parents were involved as well, and one of the things that we really want to, I guess, highlight is to raise the awareness of the value of these connections and the storytelling. So the parents' involvement here in this project was really interesting because they were partly translating at times, relaying. So the children, and often we speak in English with our children, but here they got to see their parents actually translating, seeing that skill as well, and being able to bring that story to them. So sometimes it's their role that's really important to highlight as well. So it's just all this intergenerational complex connections, and really the theme, the golden thread here are the stories.
And sometimes the the retelling of the stories are not word for word, which that's the reality basically of what it's like at home, and that for us it's fine. You know, we're not trying to do it. So after the story's been told and it's been translated, it's what the grandchild or the child in this case, what they remember and how they're telling it. Obviously to the nearest as possible, but I think the emphasis is it has to be word for word.
Brilliant. We're going to watch another clip when we come back from the break, so I can't wait to see the second one, and we're going to talk a bit more about this. So please join us after the break, where we're going to talk a bit more about intergenerational storytelling. See you then. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Woman Today. We are talking about intergenerational storytelling. So we're talking about how storytelling between the grandparents and the grandchildren has declined, perhaps, or what we can do to get that back up again. So that's what we're talking about today. We've got with us two guests, Dr. Ruby and Brother NURULL, who are talking about a fantastic project which they were part of, which is Stories from Home, where they filmed different parts of the community, various grandparents with their grandchildren telling stories from their past. And we're just talking about some of the issues that have risen up from that project. So if you would like to get involved and if you would like to tell us your experiences of this, please do call us today and we would love to hear from you. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. So we saw the clip before the break about the grandfather speaking to his grandson. And one thing I wanted to ask was about, you filmed a lot of these stories throughout the whole community. And I know you did Bangladeshi as well as non-Bangladeshi community as well. Were there any common themes that came up between the stories? Were there anything that was quite similar between the different stories that you heard?
I think one of them, you may be able to add to this, some of the stories are actually quite universal. Okay. So they're not exclusive. So like the story of the sticks, for example. So we were at a film festival, we were invited there, we showed one of the films, and there were people from different parts of the world who'd heard that similar story or were told that when they were young, for example.
So and basically, if you break one, it breaks.
There you go. There you go. Right. So you already know it. And so obviously,
I watched the clip.
Yeah, there you go. But obviously, just in different parts of the world, whether it be this one, there are others that are very. Some of the stories are quite universal, and the films we're trying to obviously create a diverse range of stories, whether it be journeys, whether it be folk tales, or even just like fun memories that they had when they were a child. But so. But journeys seem to be some of the kind of common themes that generally come up. But that's because sometimes there's a limit of how long we're spending with them. But if we were to deliver more workshops, then no doubt there'll be different things that that they'd want to kind of share, or if there's particular prompts that are made available to them, it will trigger a memory that may have been lost for a particular time. But that's through my experience. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I mean, from Stories from Home, as we were saying in the break, actually, that there were a lot of stories, but as Nora was saying, because of budget, and we wanted to create actually films that had a diversity in the stories that were told. And, Gitcha, folk tales that they've been mentioned. But within the Muslim community, as the Bangladeshi community that are Muslim, from my own kind of research that I did during my PhD, generally there was something from the grandparents around, similar to Hisham's granddad, around dua, around passing on faith values, hoping that the children would make dua for them after passing. A couple of the grandparents were saying that if my grandchild thinks of me, makes dua, prays 2 rakah, in remembrance, that would be enough for me. The other thing was about their faith identity. For the grandparents, that was really something that they were important. But through the Stories from Home project, one thing was the cultural identity. So really having the importance of the language and the cultural identity through the stories was important for the grandparents. One of the stories was the journey from Bangladesh to here, Bubu's journey. So that was the first time the grandchild heard that story. But it was really like what migration was like, and probably that draws onto some of the research you did, or the stories that you did from Mining Community Project with the elders. So it is about change, travel, migration, but also a shift in values, maybe what the grandparents morals. It's the moral values of the family values that grandparents may be observing, but not often may have an input in some way, because we're so busy with our kids that I don't know how often we go back and ask how we're doing parenting, because we want to parent differently, maybe we want to embrace a community or society that we live in. So in the process of doing that, we actually forget the value, or an overlook the value that our parents and grandparents can have, and the input they can have.
It's quite interesting because we, on the last show, we spoke about the role of the parents and how that can actually work against the grandparents and the grandchildren having a relationship. And something happened to me personally this week with my mum and my daughter. And what was interesting was I was staying at my mum's house, and she was basically rolling out some dough. She was making something, and then my daughter was watching TV. She looked over. She was asking me, "What is Nana doing?" And before I would have said to her, "Oh, Nana's doing this." I would have explained what was happening, and then she would have gone back to the TV. But I said to her, actually, bearing in mind what we discussed a couple of weeks ago, I said to her, "Why don't you go over and ask Nana?" But then I was thinking, that, should I say that? I said, no, why don't you go over and watch and see what Nana's doing, and let's see what you can find out. So she went over. She was looking for a long time, and then she understood. Oh, Nana's making my favourite snack. And then I went to the kitchen to do something. Came back, and she's sitting there with my mum cutting the pastry, and she's never done that before. And there was no she didn't have to give her instructions. She just did it, and she did it perfectly. And I thought, had I interjected and explained, definitely she would have got bored and gone back to the TV. And what was interesting was she left something she was watching on TV that was very interesting to go and do this with my mum. And it comes back to the point of this project where parents do have a key role, but is there a situation where the grandparents and the grandchildren kind of have to be left alone to be able to have this relationship? And as parents, can we play against that sometimes?
I think the dynamics obviously are different in various households. I mean, growing up, but in the 80s, 90s, obviously everybody lived together. But now you've got some families, you've got who are still living with their parents, and others due to different reason, overcrowdedness, they're not together, and so they only get to see their grandparents every so often. They may be FaceTiming and talking every day. But generally what may happen in my experience is that if, for example, my mum calls and they're speaking to my kids, so it'll be like literally what you're doing, what you eating, and then the phone goes to the next child, and then they do the same thing, and they keep on passing. So again, on the phone it's very, very restricted, but when they meet in person, whether it be they're cooking, you know, when my mum comes round, you know, she'll kind of start saying the story, whether they understand it or not. And we try and do that as often as possible, and we're trying to do different things, but I think the dynamics are a bit more different in various households. And those who do live with their grandparents, you'll know that their confidence and speaking of the mother tongue is, you know, you can hear the difference between those who don't live with their grandparents, for example.
And it's interesting because my daughter can't speak. I mean, she speaks a different dialect of Bangla to my mum, and she doesn't speak Bangla, but she understands. And I think what I learned from that was I just have to leave them alone, and they're perfectly fine. And I think that's what's interesting about what's happening now in terms of parents and grandparents and the grandchild, that sometimes we think we need to be the person in the middle to get the relationship together and make sure that person's understanding what that person's saying, but sometimes we can work against that.
I mean, that'd be a fascinating bit of research, actually, just to understand the parents' generation, what it is that they feel that would be amiss if they don't interject,
that
or if
really
they don't.
Interesting.
What is it that we worry about? What's the concern that we have as parents? And often we think a child might be bored, they're not engaged enough, they're not stimulated enough maybe by that activity. But just from what you just described between your daughter and your mum, it's that silence is golden sometimes for our children. Our children might not be experiencing enough silence because we're constantly wanting to stimulate them. So there is something about just letting them be and letting that relationship happen. And like you were saying, you know, when children call, they want to speak. Video calls they just want to see what you're doing. You know, my granddaughter said, "Ba, I want to see. You know, what are you doing?" So sometimes it's just their curiosity, and I think children are naturally curious, and we're not tapping into that curiosity by either stopping it somehow unintentionally. A lot of it is unintentional, because if we knew the benefits, if we understood the benefits, we would never do those. We'd be more aware and conscious. So a lot of what's happening is unintentional. So projects like these are really to make our interactions more intentional, because we don't have the resources to be natural in that way. So, you know, we don't live in the same households. So parents have to make it intentional that when I drop my children off to grandma's, maybe I can be out the way for a while and then come back. So it has to be intentional, more intentional than maybe in previous times, because our lives are so different now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the conversation with Lindsay,
Yes.
colleague, when we first were describing the project that we're going to be doing, and he found it really bizarre because obviously his communication with his grandparents growing up was just, it was conversational all the way.
Yeah.
And then when he heard that, in our household, there's that gap between the grandparents, it was just really bizarre for him.
Yeah.
And so, this is where, for us it was like the workshops, it brought those three kind of generations together, and it created that space for them, kind of a friendly kind of environment for them to kind of talk in ways that normally they wouldn't do at home. And I think that's what happened when we deliver these workshops or the screenings. It does get parents, grandparents kind of really thinking
the value of that input. I was at a conference recently, and I got an email after the conference, person saying that he actually became more interested and learnt his mother tongue. I think it was Swedish or something, because he felt such a disconnect with his grandmother, and it was because of his grandma, the value he had in that relationship, that he picked up that language again at 25. So there's always hope, but it's really
never too late.
no, it's never too late.
Yeah.
But there's always, some parents will say to me, "Oh, my child's 11, they don't speak any Bangla." Just keep at it, just do it. Even today, I was saying to my daughter-in-law, "Is there any point? My granddaughter only says 2 words in Bangla. Should I just stop?" And she said, "Well, that's going against everything you're studying." But it's this. Sometimes we need that support from the rest of the community as well, that keep going, keep at it, rather than saying that your granddaughter's not understanding anything you're saying, just stop. We sometimes are discouraged.
When we've done one of our early projects, Languages in Our Lives, so we delivered that project with slightly older young people. And for them, they had kind of emphasised that they had wished that their parents encouraged them more. So because now they're going to
Everyone
gatherings,
says that.
they're going to gatherings and
everybody
they
says
can't
that,
communicate with their relatives. They can understand it, but it's this lack of kind of confidence, and they can't converse. So they'd wish. And for me, one of the things that really, last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh, and obviously an element of that was for language. But my observations and my experiences, that it feels like we're losing it. And for me, it really dawned on me that in history, when we noted down, it was our generation where it potentially declined or maybe even lost. And so that really got me. I don't want to be I don't want to be noted in history that my
That's just
generation.
hit me actually. Just the way, it's
And
true.
so, but again, it's for some families, it's really important for them. For some families, they've not actually thought about it, and for others, they want to kind of continue this kind of passing on. And it's not just the language. There's a whole range of other things. Food, we're doing a few projects around the different types of foods that we're eating or what they're eating, what's being passed down to them. So it all kind of interlinks with whether it be language, heritage, culture. 10, 15 years time, what will their identity? How will they identify themselves as?
It's just like, Nabi, you were talking about your daughter doing the cutting of the. Our generation, do we make those kind of bitter?
Or what dishes will be passed down? We just
what are we
finished the
passing down?
projects.
But she will remember that experience. That was.
It is. It's exactly to do with that, because it's all part of the whole idea. We talked about the whole child, like how do we basically develop a child's identity. And we talked about how it's the grandparents that play a huge part in that, in terms of, my mum did something I couldn't do. I wouldn't be able to sit there and do that, but my mum did it. And I couldn't get my daughter to engage the way my mum did it. So it's just, and I think this whole storytelling project, we're going to watch the second clip, where one thing I picked up was body language, how storytelling can also be done through body language, how it's the close proximity of how they're sitting together. And I think that's something that they don't do anymore. I think grandparents and grandchildren, and we're going to watch the second clip and then maybe we can talk a bit more about that. So the second clip we're going to show is called Bird and Ear. So let's watch that now.
আম্মা আমাকে একটা স্টোরি বলতে পারবা?
দুইজন বন্ধু একসাথে গল্প করছিল। একজন আরেকজনকে বোকা বানানোর জন্য এক ফ্রেন্ড আরেক বন্ধুকে বলল তোমার কান পাঁচ পাখি চিলি নিয়ে গেছে।
Two friends was chatting together. To fool each other, one said to the other, "That bird has taken one of your ears."
বন্ধুটা ও নিজের কান চেক না করেই চিলের পিছনে দৌড়াচ্ছে। অনেক দূরে দৌড়াতে দৌড়াতে ওর সাথে একটা বৃদ্ধ লোকের সাথে দেখা হয়। বৃদ্ধ লোকটা তখন জিজ্ঞেস করে, তুমি কেন চিলের পিছনে দৌড়াচ্ছ?
The friend was running after the bird. After running for a long time, the friend met an old man who asked him, "Why are you running?"
তারপর লোকটা বলে, আমার বন্ধু বলেছে আমার একটা কান নাকি চিলি নিয়ে গেছে। তখন বৃদ্ধ লোকটাকে জিজ্ঞেস করে, তুমি কি তোমার নিজের কান চেক করেছো?
And the friend said, "The bird has taken my ear." The old man asked, "Have you checked your ears?"
তারপর লোকটা চেক করলো, ওর কান ঠিকই আছে এবং ও বুঝতে পারলো ও শুধু শুধু নিজের সময় এবং পরিশ্রম দুইটাই অপচয় করেছে।
The friend checked his ears and realized he has both. He realized he's been tricked and he just wasted his time and energy.
What's quite interesting about that is, I know we spoke about language, how we are losing the Bengali language or our mother tongue language, if you like. But I think what's also quite interesting is even if the children don't pick up the language, but they picked up the story, and she will pass that story on to her daughters and her sons, and that will carry on for generations. And I think that's what's amazing about this project, that even if we don't achieve keeping the mother tongue alive, but the stories are alive, and that will carry on. I don't know if you got a sense of that as well.
Well, that's the first time that she'd heard that story, actually. It's the first time it's been kind of told, and obviously, like you said, and so we've used obviously film. Obviously, once it's online, you can watch it here, you can watch it in Bangladesh, you can watch it anywhere in the world, and that's the idea, to kind of create these library of these kind of untold stories that, you know, in certain families just not been heard before.
And I think you know, the whole concept of oral storytelling, especially in the Bangladeshi community, because obviously a lot of stories are not recorded, it's all passed down. And I remember growing up, we used to be told stories, but then we don't do it. Why is it that we don't do that to our children? Why has it stopped, do you think? Like, you know, the parents to the children carrying on the storytelling that we've learned from our, I mean, is language playing an issue in that, do you think?
I mean, so my bread and butter, I guess, is working with parents. And one of the things I do find is this notion of how busy we are. You know, there's so many things we need to get to our children too. So we're sort of ferrying our children around most of the weekday, or even so at the weekend. The weekends are even busier. So I look at back to when my children were growing up, but my nieces and nephews, weekends are due. You just don't have time. This club, that club, this and the other. And also when we were growing up, a lot of the community actually invested in language classes. So supplementary schools where with learning the Quran, we would also have Bangla once a week.
Bangla Fora, we used to call it.
Yeah, Bangla Fora, So we used to have that embedded into our those classes. Then we went on to secondary school where we may have picked up Bangla as a GCSE. So there was those things that we could access and keep up our language. And I know my nieces and nephews who've done that, they can read and write Bangla, they understand Bangla. But as we are raising our children, the new generations, maybe, Allahu Alam, this is a hypothesis, you know, so we don't value the GCSE in Bangla, so the schools just drop that subject. So that it's not even available in many schools, secondary schools. The supplementary classes, not everybody's accessing it. Maybe we want them to learn Mandarin or Spanish. Not that it's bad or another language, whatever language it is, it's great. So multilingualism, bilingualism is just fantastic. But what's really worrying is that, you know, where we have that bilingualism inherited, we're churning out monolingual children potentially,
Yeah.
and becoming us ourselves, you
And
know,
therefore
funneling
limiting
that, limiting them.
Yeah.
You know, on that point, even with slightly older kids that I work with, when they're looking for employment on their CVs, very often you won't find a second language on there. They won't put that on there. It's only when I mentioned it to them and I said, well, especially if you're applying for a job where there's potentially you're going to have Bengali customers, clients, then that would be a fantastic skill to add on there. But they don't consider it.
They don't value it.
They don't. I don't know if it's not they value, but they don't.
It hasn't registered.
Yeah, that you know
Because
what,
we
this is an
haven't.
additional
Really
skill.
interesting.
So they never
Yeah.
put down
That's so
as an
interesting.
additional kind of skill that they can speak. And obviously, you know, especially in a place like HAMLETS, that's a great skill to have.
Yeah.
You know, so it kind of it's kind of getting them to recognise that, you know what, this is part of who they are. This is part of their heritage. It's not about forcing it. For us, we had our different interests in terms of doing this project, and I think when people do come across it, it does make them realise. And then it's up to them, obviously, what they decide to do, or what changes, if any changes they want to make in their homes or environment or circles or spaces that they have, of how much they value or the importance of it.
Definitely.
It's a skill, isn't it? It's a skill. It's something that, regardless of everything else we were discussing, it's a skill in its own right.
Yeah.
And maybe those young people might take it for granted, or maybe they feel that it might not be valued. If it was French or Spanish, would it have more clout?
And just using this medium of like a film, for example, or this particular style. So we know online, those who have children who go online, you'll see the millions of hits some of these channels have. And there are other amazing projects that are happening, and we're learning. I'm learning so much, and I'll be the first to put my hand up to say that I don't know enough about my own heritage, that I need to do far more when it comes to my own
I think
family
it's
and
an
kids.
amazing project. I think it's a step in the right direction. And I mean, if I was to ask you one last question, what can we do to keep storytelling alive? What can we do to keep it going? I mean, what's the next part of this journey that you've started with this project? Where would you like it to go?
We're trying to get it to as many places that will have us, whether it's academic conferences to a screening at different places. And really just for the community, not just sort of to see the issue at play, but also to celebrate the diversity that we have, the languages that we have. You know, sometimes we talk about Sylheti and Bangla, which one or not. It's actually whatever you're fluent in. Just keep that going in your home. In Bangladesh, every 20 miles, the dialect changes. But Sylheti definitely has an incredible history. It had its own script, and Bangla, as we know, is a medium of instruction for a lot of the learning. So it's really to value what we have for community, as a Bangladeshi community, to also celebrate that history, but also creating spaces where that can happen, where possible, and enjoy it as well. You know, we've done some intergenerational activities where it's so wonderful seeing grandparents laughing, enjoying the activities. So the workshops we held at school, they really enjoyed coming out. It was difficult. Some of those grandparents, it was difficult physically to come to a venue like this and be a part. But it was really interesting holding them at school, because the school community actually started to value this intergenerational interaction. The schools have started to do some projects around getting grandparents into maybe setting up their gardening project or storytelling in the classrooms. You can invite people in to tell stories. In previous projects, we've had grandparents being invited to tell stories around the katha we have, the quilts. And they've loved it. Snow White, we've had grandparents coming to tell into school, telling their version of Snow White. So some of these stories are common to many cultures.
And I think it's amazing, and I really hope you do continue this project. It's the first time I've come across it, and I love it. I love everything about it, and it's amazing. So I really hope that it continues. And we have to end the show now. So thank you so much to you both for coming. Really appreciate your time. And thank you for listening and tuning in today to the show. So we will be back again on the next show. So thank you very much for taking part and Take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.